Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Tish Harrison Warren. Tish is an Anglican priest and author. She's also formerly New York Times op-ed writer. This is Tish's second time to be on our show. It was delightful talking to her about her new book entitled What Grows in Weary Lands, a book that she wrote out of her own season of burnout and discovering some ancient wisdom from the desert fathers and mothers about how one might navigate such difficult and weary times and seasons. It was a lovely conversation with some delightful wisdom. I hope you enjoy this. Here's Tish Harrison Warren.
Hey, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, a cognitive scientist and host of the podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, a show about who we are and who we become when life makes other plans.
I wish that I hadn't resisted for so long the need to change.
We have to be willing to live with a kind of uncertainty that none of us likes.
You can have opinions, you can have like a strong stance, and then there's your body having its own program.
Listen to A Slight Change of Plans wherever you get your podcasts.
Starting something new is not just hard, it can be terrifying. What I discovered was that having the right partners was crucial. Partners like Shopify. To get started with your own shop, use the Shopify Design Studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. If you get stuck, Shopify is always around to share advice with their 24/7 customer support. You know that iconic purple Shop Pay button used by millions of businesses around the world? It's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. It also helps boost conversions, meaning less carts going abandoned and more sales for you. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/NSE. Go to shopify.com/NSE. That's shopify.com/NSE. Tish Harrison Warren, welcome back to No Small Endeavor.
I'm so glad to be back. Thanks.
Lovely to have you back. And congratulations on the new book. And I was wondering if there's a sort of perverse irony in the sense that your way of dealing with your burnout is to write a new book.
Absolutely. Yeah. Writers, we have a lot of perverse ironies in our life, but I think, the burnout really started way before I wrote the book. So it wasn't the immediate response to burnout. I feel like there had been a long season of weariness before I started writing. And I was working at the New York Times, which was an intense and busy and big kind of all-consuming job. So actually compared to writing about faith for the New York Times every week, in the first year I worked there, I wrote 48 out of 51 weeks. So it was a lot of writing a book was actually quite spacious and slow for compared to that. And but I mean, for better or worse, and often it's for worse, but part of the reason I write is that it is the way that I figure out my own life. It's the way I figure out what I believe and who I am and what I think. And I feel like normal people can kind of talk to a friend and figure out what they think, but I have to write 60 to 80,000 words and then edit it down over 2 years. And then I'm like, okay, I kind of know what I think now. And so I have,
It reminds me of that a lot from Augustine about I write in order to understand, right? So there's something about trying to make sense of the world that for some of us, unfortunately, only comes through that mechanism.
Absolutely. And this book, actually, I left the New York Times and was contracted for a different book. So I was not writing on burnout. I was writing on something else that hopefully I'll still write that book someday. But it was in the process of writing that book that I was having this my own kind of personal internal struggle with my life, and just feeling like I didn't know what things that had been creatively, I mean, I've always really loved writing. And so things that have been, creatively fruitful and life-giving, relationships that had been life-giving, experiences with God and prayer that have been life-giving. Those kinds of experiences suddenly felt really empty and difficult and arduous in a way that they hadn't before. And so I was really just trying to figure out what the heck is happening with me, and spent a lot of time reading about that, wrestling with that. Time I should have spent, thought, I was going to spend writing this other book, where I was finding myself reading about burnout and about, and then coming across these crazy men and women that I write about in the book, these crazy monks out in the desert. And so I didn't set out to go, I'm now going to write a book about burnout. I set out to write a different book. And this issue, I would say, kind of kept arising in my own life and in my friends, my community. And so I actually went back to the publisher and said, can I write a totally different book?
So when you encountered the Desert Fathers and Mothers, for those who are unfamiliar with who these folks are, why don't you give kind of a brief description of what gave rise to these communities and what you found, maybe quickly, what you found compelling in them?
Yeah. So the Desert Fathers and Mothers are these men and women, and it was as many women as men, in fact, more women, from about the 3rd to the 5th centuries, literally went out to the desert, particularly around Egypt, but also Syria, other parts of the Middle East, and moved out of cities, out of civilization, which was wildly countercultural at the time. I mean, it's countercultural now to leave civilization, but at this time, I mean, the desert was this place that was understood as kind of just, even spiritually dark, but also physically. I mean, we're in a time where things are dangerous, and there's not, we don't have locks on our door, and we don't have light, electric light. So they go out and they lived in caves or small huts and spent their lives in rhythms of prayer and work. They often lived by themselves, but also kind of around other little communities began to form of all these individual men and women living by themselves but near one another. And so their movement ended up totally accidentally. I mean, they had no idea they were birthing movement, but this was the movement that ended up St. Benedict drew on them when he wrote his rule. And so they ended up essentially birthing all of Western monasticism. I mean, the concept of monk and someone who gives their life to ora et labora, prayer and work, kind of arose from these early communities. But at the time, they were just like wild. I mean, this was not like a programmed it was just people kind of leaving to live. I mean, I say in the book, like, they were a little bit punk rock in the sense that they were questioning the values of their culture. They definitely were a subculture, and they were leaving to devote their lives entirely to prayer, but also to kind of, and as the book says, there was an emphasis on like learning how to become who they were meant to be, like being the fullness of a human being. And so they ended up kind of becoming spiritual celebrities in their own time, influencers, if you will, of the 3rd through the 5th century.
And some of them certainly were far out. I mean, you have Simon. What was he called? Simon the Stylite.
Simon the Stylite,
who's somehow living on the top of a 60-foot pillar or something.
Yeah, he built a pillar, and scholars have different. There's debate about why he did that. Like, was he trying? Did he? There was a notion at the time that that spirits were kind of in the air. So was he like literally ascending? But most people think it was. He was living in a cave, and he was fine with that. And he got so kind of well known that all these pilgrims and travelers kept coming to ask him for advice, to like seek wisdom. And he went out to the desert to try to practice solitude. And it got so hectic, all these like spiritual seekers coming to him, that he literally like built a pillar to be like left alone, basically. But totally crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much in the Desert Fathers and Mothers that I still don't know what to do with.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot that I left out of this book because I'm like, that's just a wild and crazy story. And but then there was the thing that made me laugh, and the thing that sort of drew me to them, is there is this sort of like just like crazy stuff happening. And I mean, they were really just like hard to understand from our cultural perspective. Yet there's these moments in their writing where they feel so contemporary. I mean, they write about doubt. They write about irritation and boredom. They write about conflict. They write about dealing with like anger and jealousy inside of themselves. They were really open and vulnerable about their own kind of struggles. And they're even like a little funny at times, and kind of in a funny, self-deprecating way. And so they I mean, it was just so interesting to me that they wrote so much about boredom, and they wrote so much about the sense of God's distance, even though they were living such, kind of spiritually radical lives. And they wrote about things like weariness and what we would call burnout. Yeah. They just wrote about it so often and in such human ways that it felt like these people who really, truly are it just seemed crazy in lots of ways. In other ways, felt like, oh, they're reading my journal. I mean, it felt so. Right. It felt like something that a friend would say, and but a really wise friend.
Yeah. At one point, you say they're akin to advanced research scientists into the human condition. And I like that description, just in the sense that they're genuinely trying to make sense of how we humans experience life and how not to grow captured by the things that can so easily capture us, perhaps. So when you're navigating this, I think it's really interesting that you, several times in the book, you kind of juxtapose the way they look at life and the way they just accept the long, hard slog that the spiritual life often is, to some sort of affective or maybe affectatious way of thinking about spirituality. And you even say early in the book that maybe the tradition of American revivalism has done a great deal of damage to our notions of the spiritual life. But I don't know, unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So about revivalism specifically, I think revivalism was a movement that is kind of worked its way through different centuries, 17th and then 18th century in the United States, and well, I guess 19th century as well. But we have concepts of this, right? Like the evangelical had an anxious bench where you were sort of kind of working yourself up into this sort of this experience of emotion or fear or even excitement kind of before God. But the idea of faith in America is so shaped by kind of a particular, we think about it as a particular feeling or a particular sort of spiritual experience. And consumerism has melded with faith so much in the United States, in the Western world, really, that it can be really difficult to separate kind of genuine faith from the kind of consumeristic, I don't know, industrial complex of faith. And so those things can meld together to say, hey, you need to be having this particular experience of God or life or faith or relationships. And if you're not, buy my book or, listen to my podcast or take this course or go to a new church or, find a new faith, like whatever the kind of like new thing is. And it was interesting to me, these monks, these men and women had such a profound dedication to patience. Talking about the advanced research scientists, I mean, I say that in the context of them going out to the desert, and they did it to kind of flee sin, right? Or to flee like the temptations of civilization. And then they got out there and they realized they brought him right with them, that you can't get away, that temptation is not something sort of outside of us, or the problems of this world are not something outside of us, but that they're inside of us too. And so there's this great story that actually didn't make the book of a monk that was living in community and struggled so much with anger. And so everyone around him was just irritating him. And so he decided to be a hermit. And so he left his community so that he would be free of anger. And he was by himself in a cave, and he went to get water, had to walk a long way to get water, came back. And when he did, he stumbled, and the water basin that he had tipped over and the water poured out. And he got so angry, he kicked it and broke it. And he said at that moment, he realized, because he was all alone, he realized the anger was not because of other people, but the anger was inside himself. So he picked up and went back and lived with the community that he had left.
On that, you've got somebody else, and you quote them as saying, if a trial comes upon you in the place where you live, do not leave that place. Wherever you go, you find that what you are running from is ahead of you. Yeah. That idea was picked up by Benedict a lot to say almost something very similar in his rule. But that was from the Desert Fathers and Mothers, this idea of they kind of discovered, the problem wasn't civilization. And so they ended up spending so much time going, well, where does this anger come from? Where does jealousy come from? Where does boredom come from? Where does resentment or unforgiveness come from? And to looking, and then how does one respond to that? And so in a really early kind of primitive way, they were truly kind of like thinking deeply and researching about what is a human being, why do we have the emotions and responses that we have, and thinking about what is wisdom? Like, what is the wise response then to anger? What is the wise response to boredom and to frustration? And so going back to what you were saying about revivalism, this high view of patience, this expectation that life actually isn't going to be hopping from bliss to bliss, or even that like the spiritual life is not meant to be hopping from bliss to bliss. They had this huge value for what they, in the historic Christian tradition would be called fortitude. We don't use the word fortitude very much anymore, but we would now call that like resilience. And I just think patience, perseverance, resilience, as a culture, these are not virtues we talk about a lot. They're not very sexy. They're not cool. They're not as cool as other virtues like courage or justice or and
And I just wanted to make space for kind of the need for these in our culture and what it would look like to cultivate them.
You that last line about cultivating these virtues, you as well, another thread that kind of runs throughout is your suggestion that we might do a lot better of thinking about faith not as assent to intellectual propositions, but as much more akin to a craft. And then you can begin to see kind of obviously the necessity of fortitude, of sticking with it, that anybody who does a craft, it takes a lifetime, right? But unpack more for you the significance or the importance of thinking about faith under the metaphor of craft.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a metaphor I use throughout the book. It's not a perfect metaphor. I don't claim that it is, but I think for me, it was so powerful because, I went through this season. This comes out of a season where relationships felt hard, friendships felt hard, parenting felt hard, creative work felt hard, and faith felt hard. Like I told my husband, I'm an Anglican priest, so it's kind of bad when you're an Anglican priest and faith is feeling hard. But that prayer felt like the light had gone dead. It just, there was a sense of unfulfillment there, and I think because of American religion and revivalism, I wasn't sure what to do with that. I didn't know, does that mean you leave? Does that mean I find a different faith? Am I doing something wrong? Is this like something that is like a problem that I need to figure out? And yeah, so the notion of faith as a craft. So as a writer, far more than as a Christian, as a writer, I kind of learned pretty early on that my feeling about this craft would change pretty dramatically, day to day, week to week, and year to year. That there would be times where this art that I do for my living and for and as a way to figure out the world, at times feels like really fun and really fruitful. And that's what gets you kind of started. I mean, most writers at one point love writing, but I'm been around enough and have enough friends that are writers that I know that everybody gets to places where they think, can I just dig ditches for a living? Why am I doing this? And I just know that writers, there's not a particular feeling that one's supposed to have as a writer. And actually, there's so much focus on, quote unquote, flow, and that flow state where it's, you're at the top of your game and words are flowing from you, or in athletics, it's it's effortless and frictionless. And it's and those are beautiful moments, but they're so rare. And so to actually sustain a craft or a practice or, an athletic endeavor, you can't really shoot for those. You can't do it for that, because you'll never actually end up being a writer, because you're just chasing something that's so rare. And so I knew, as a writer, kind of what matters is what Anne Lamott said, butt in chair. It's the practice. It's this repetitive habit of being and doing. And if you ever do get to that sort of euphoric moment of flow, first of all, you never can control it. You never know when it's coming. And it's by weeks and weeks and years of just these small practices where it seems like nothing is happening or there's not much progress. But it's all of those hours of writing where it's just, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's the repetition of that. So, Anne Lamott famously says what it takes to be a writer: butt in chair, start anywhere, do it badly, get butt back in chair. This like getting this like constant sort of repetition of practice. And so I identified with that as a writer, and I kind of used it as a metaphor to talk about faith, of that whatever you imagine as kind of flow, like whatever spiritual experience is kind of the euphoria. I think that we tend to sell faith on that experience, but what faith actually looks like is so quiet and so daily and so butt in chair, metaphorically.
Yeah. Related to that, you spent some time talking about St. John of the Cross and his notion of the dark night of the soul, and how he's pointing us towards the alternate ways one could think about the spiritual life in terms of it could be a pursuit of, we put this in scare quotes, spiritual pleasure, or the pursuit of that which is good in and of itself or in and of God's self. I don't know. Unpack that one for us as well a bit.
Yeah. So he was talking about this idea of the dark night of the soul, which I had misunderstood, and I say that in the book. I had kind of used that phrase, the dark night of the soul, to mean like when really bad stuff happens, like when you're walking through grief or tragedy. But that's not primarily how he uses it. He doesn't necessarily mean that it is deepest suffering. He's talking about a stage in the life of faith where he said you kind of begin in what he calls the illumination, where you experience, he calls it the sweetness. It's that newness. And we have this, I think we have this in the life of faith. We have this in relationships. We have this with like exciting new projects. It's that like things feel exciting. They feel fruitful. They at times feel like electric. It's like, it's the launch, it's the excitement. Mm-hmm. And in the historic language of the Christian tradition, we are full of consolation. And then we move to this place where essentially it's almost like on a bike where when the resistance is turned up, when you like go up a gear, it gets harder, right, to learn. It gets harder to pedal. And that and it's the same idea, is that the dark night of the soul kind of turns up the resistance. God, John of the Cross would say, removes the subjective experience of God's presence. And that is not meant as an abandonment per se, but it is meant to sort of wean us off of an addiction to kind of what we think the spiritual life should feel like, or what we think God should behave like, and allow us to sort of seek God for God's own self. So he talks about the dark night of the soul as this time of doubt, deep doubt, this time of, he calls it aridity, drawing from the Desert Fathers and Mothers, the idea of arid, like when things don't feel like they're not growing. And he says when this is part of the maturation process of the spiritual life, one may argue of a human being. And he says when this happens, people will say it's because you are doing something wrong. It's because you're not holy enough, whatever. It's because you need to cheer up. It's your disposition. You're not chipper enough. But he actually saw this as this like super important stage, though one experiences what he would call desolation, but that it is like absolutely necessary to learn to persevere, learn resilience in the middle of that, and that it kind of, without that, we cannot become who we're meant to be. We cannot sort of fully grow into maturity.
It seems that much of what you're developing here, even with that conversation about St. John of the Cross, that in our world, the contemporary world, freedom is typically thought of as disburdenment, being free from difficulty, and yet you're pointing us to a kind of different sort of way of narrating life and a sort of deeper acceptance of there's actually maturity means some sort of embrace of burden or embrace of limits or embrace of the fact that we're mortal and finite. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I am talking a lot about embracing limits, and I am also talking a lot about embracing the arduous good. This is a phrase I use again and again in the book. I think we have such a high value in our culture, whether or not this is articulated. I think just it's the water we swim in, of ease and of convenience, of efficiency. Our smartphones really would even more kind of train us towards looking for things to be easy and very quick. And not just that, but I think social media, I think kind of the good life as portrayed on Instagram, it's a life that is frictionless. We want frictionlessness. But there's this concept, I draw it from Thomas Aquinas, of the arduous good, which is that the things that give our life profound meaning are often difficult. Like binge watching on Netflix is not difficult. It is easy. It is a life of ease. I can DoorDash and have food to me that I did not have to make or harvest, and I can sit and sort of numb out. There's an ease to that, but there's a lack of meaning there. Like that's not you can't build your life on that. I'm not saying that you should never binge a good show or something, but that is not so I think our culture is really addicted to ease, but really, really lacking meaning. And I think that's a lot of the crisis that we see in our kind of political world is lack of meaning. I think I think a lot of what drives our profound sense of loneliness is also that this idea that we have a hard time with the arduous good. I don't think we have a great category in our culture for arduous goods, that there can be things that are really, really good, but that they actually do make your life more difficult, that they add friction to your life, that they add conflict to your life, that they make things more risky or less, at least less easy. But that's actually like the good stuff, and learning to walk towards that and towards the limits of that, towards the difficulty of that, instead of fleeing from it, I think is so countercultural. But I also think like those are the muscles we have to develop. Those are the muscles I have to develop.
Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp here. At No Small Endeavor, we spend a lot of time talking about a good life. But the truth is, a good life is not something we can figure out alone. It's something we discover together in community. That's why we created Endeavor Together. Endeavor Together helps small groups gather to talk about the big questions of life using episodes of the No Small Endeavor podcast. Each series is a simple 4-week guide with questions, short videos, and prompts designed to spark meaningful conversation. We've just released our newest series called A Good Life. It's a 4-part exploration of what it means to pursue a life worth living in community. Here's how it works. Participants listen to a podcast episode ahead of time, then gather with a group to talk it through. We provide the framework for great conversation. The best part is, thanks to our friends at the Lilly Endowment Incorporated, it's completely free. You can explore A Good Life along with our other conversation series like Let's Disagree Better and Vulnerability by visiting nosmallendeavor.com or clicking the link in the show notes.
Blowing ad budget on metrics that look great till the CFO sees them? That's bull spend. And marketers are calling it out in Dashboard. Confessions.
I remember telling my boss, it'll be good for the brand, when leads were slow. Yeah, it wasn't.
Cut the bull spend. LinkedIn lets you target by company, job title, and more. Advertise on LinkedIn. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a $250 credit. Go to linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, I find that phrase immensely helpful. And as you're saying, there's, I suppose, most anything about life that we probably are going to count as good necessarily is freighted with the arduous, right? It's relationships, friendships, doing work well over a long period of time, community, and that indeed we don't want to take account of the arduous nature. It doesn't mean they're not still at various moments delightful and wonderful and all sorts of beautiful emotional experiences around all those things. But if we stick with them a long time, they're going to be arduous at some point, right? You also talk about how, and I was thinking about this because I had a student who recently who's older, middle of life age, and she was accepting that she had to grieve that certain decisions that she had made when she was younger to do good work, what she thought was good work as a 20-something-year-old, meant that she had hemmed herself in certain ways. And you directly address that and say, this is what it means to take life seriously, is that you can't do everything, and you necessarily in some ways kind of paint yourself into a corner because you have to make some sort of choices. But I don't know, I found that remarkable that you're saying, yeah, that is the way life is. But I don't know, further commentary on that?
Yeah, I do talk about that. I talk about when I was younger, in my 20s, the notion of getting stuck somewhere was terrifying to me. Or settling, the idea of settling. I don't use that language in the book, but and I have sort of come to see in my midlife, like if you refuse to get stuck, what that means is we'll never develop depth. You can't develop roots. You can't develop deep relationships because all of those require, and it's impossible, like you said, because whatever decision you make, you're deciding against something else. And so you get to midlife and you realize, oh, there are doors closed to me that I thought, would be interesting if I lived another life, kind of. There are paths that I didn't explore. And life is limited. I'm limited. Time is limited. And so, but I don't think that is scary anymore. I think that actually is like when the good stuff starts. It's like where the treasure is buried. Because there's this idea, the word for patience in Arabic comes from the same root as the word to be confined. And there's something about this sort of confinements of our life, which is where patience begins to grow, and where, and I think with patience comes love. I mean, because ultimately I think love is patient. And so I think that honestly, there's these ways that we are confined or hem ourselves in, which actually do involve grief. And I think it's worth this person that you're talking to grieving that, not feeling that, but to also recognize that there's a gift also in the limitations of our lives that limits are a profound way of being human. And they're not something to be resisted. They're kind of a discipline to submit to. Yeah,
you quote Thomas Merton quoting an anonymous desert father saying, the reason why we do not get anywhere is that we do not know our limits, which is a constructive way to put it, right? It's that if we refuse ever to limit ourselves, if we refuse to ever accept our finitude and the fact that in some way we have to practice stability or we have to stay in some place, then we really don't ever get anywhere. And so I think it's important I appreciate that sort of reminder of, there is a grief, but there's also just simple reality, right? That to accomplish anything in life, we don't do it as unlimited, unboundaried creatures of some sort, but as very boundaried and very limited mortal creatures. I find that very helpful.
But I do think the technology we use, and particularly, sort of Instagram, social media, these sorts of things do have messages that life should feel frictionless, that limits are things to be overcome, or that limits are always things anyway to be overcome, and that we should never feel sort of stuck or bound. And a lot of what I wanted to do in this book is just tell different kinds of stories, and I wanted to normalize things being hard or things being unfulfilling. That's okay. It's not that is normal, and that's not. I think that is part of the craft of learning faith, the craft of learning love, the craft of learning to be human, that is meant to be leaned into and not avoided.
What? So here you were several years ago, columnist at the New York Times, which I would imagine for many writers that's kind of like the consummation of being a public writer, right? And I would assume surely there were parts about that were just delightful and wonderful and
it was
exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, it was such a dream job in lots of ways. Yeah.
And yet at the same time, you're kind of coming out of that burnout and it lacking some sort of sense of fulfillment. But I don't know, what did you learn out of that experience of having this kind of dream job? And how does that relate to your experience of lack of fulfillment or some sort of sense of being burned out?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still processing that in a lot of ways. I'm still processing that season. And the decision to leave was really, really hard. And I learned so much from it that I need to sort of like put down on paper or talk about. This could become a therapy session between you and I. But it is interesting. I mean, when you're at the Times, everybody answers your call when you call them. No matter who it is, you can just say, I'm with the New York Times, and they will talk to you. And it was an interesting experience leaving because I feel like I was so exposed in good ways and in bad. I mean, there was a lot of really intense public attacks on me and threats and really hard stuff. That
because of the kinds of things that you were writing?
Yeah. Also just because I wrote about faith in a very widely read newspaper. So it brings people, I don't know if you know, people in America have strong feelings about faith one way or the other. And just the state of public discourse, the state of discourse around religion right now, and the way that interweaves with politics in, I think, quite really unhealthy ways, and just the state of our public discourse is pretty vitriolic, particularly online, and so that was exhausting, but I mean, I don't think there was sort of like one thing that I learned from that. In some ways, I have way more faith. I mean, my experience with the Times as an institution was actually quite good, and it gives me a lot of hope for the ability of institutions to actually kind of seek to have diverse voices within them. I think the New York Times has not done that perfectly, but they are doing that, which I appreciate in a lot of ways. But I think it also made me, I think I'm worried about the state of discourse in American life in a way that I've not been worried about that in my lifetime. So I think things are pretty bad in terms of how we talk to each other. And I mean, in a much more simple way, now I'm just naming different things I learned. Like, I also learned how much I love small things in my life. I mean, some really amazing things happen in the New York Times, and you get cool people, you get to talk to cool people, and you get invitations to cool things. But I mean, part of why I left, and I feel like this is like horribly unfeminist to admit, but but it was the truth, is that when I started, my youngest son was 1 year old, and it was my last year with him before he started kindergarten. We were coming up on that. He was 4. And I just had this almost desperate sense. I knew he's my last child. He was kind of a miracle. We didn't expect for him to come, and he did. And I just had this deep sense that I didn't want to miss time with him. And so it was like a desperate sense to be with him in ways that being always under deadline made really hard for me. And so like choosing kind of the obscure place and choosing, I mean, I'm not saying all women should do this or something. And this was just a desire of mine, is that I felt like I didn't want to miss really small things with him. And I did when I left. Like I had the sweetest, loveliest year with him. He is a very sweet kid, and it was just really beautiful to get to spend that time with him. And so, but not just that. I mean, I wrote a lot about kind of religion in America, and so I wrote a lot about the church. And I remember one time writing. And I've told this story elsewhere, but I wrote this piece about kind of what the church is in the United States, what it should be. It was kind of this idealistic notion of we care for our neighbors. It's a community that is like deeply embodied in a place with a people where we're like loving our neighbors, that have real faces, and like, taking care, like helping the unhoused, and giving food to those that are hungry, and like working for the refugee, and like this idea. I was writing these kinds of things. And then I had an actual friend in my church who was sick, and I wanted to bring them soup. And I didn't have time to bring them soup because I was, under deadline and writing this thing. And I just thought, how ironic that I'm writing this abstracted thing about what the church should be. And because of that, I don't have capacity in my life to like go bring soup, like do the thing. And so I think that I'm more skeptical of abstract ideas helping. And I'm really, really looking for embodied reality and like practices and smallness in a way that, not to say, I mean, I have very good friends who are working for the New York Times, and I think they're doing really good and important things. So this may completely have to do with the season of life I'm in. And in a different season, I would do other things. But I think the repair that is needed in culture right now begins small, and it begins with kind of local institutions, and it begins with knowing actual neighbors, making real soup and bringing it to real people. And so I think I do want to keep writing because I just think I'm a writer and can't get away from that. But I also want the things I'm writing about, particularly faith, to not be abstracted ideas, and certainly not to be sociological ideas about the way the evangelical vote is swaying elections or something. Yeah. I want it to be enfleshed. And so that, I think that's something that was birthed in me by that experience.
Yeah, that reminds me of an interview we did with Musa Al-Gharbi on his book, We Have Never Been Woke, in which he was making the case, and while many of his concerns might be identified as woke by people on the right, he's making the case that too often the academic or public talk around such issues doesn't go far enough because it doesn't attend to material realities. And if we don't really make a difference in the lives of our neighbors in some sort of real, tangible, material sense, then we've not gone far enough. He seems to be insisting repeatedly. So I find that very helpful. One of the ways that I can imagine someone objecting to your description of the spiritual life might be, so what are you asking of us? You asking us to be just kind of grit our teeth and get on through it, and that life is a veil of tears, and buck up and accept this is the way it is. So talk to us about how you would respond to that, and or how you would want to. Is that a fair critique or no?
Yeah. So I start the book by talking about weariness and our culture of weariness and our culture of burnout. But then I do talk about this idea of kind of resilience, this idea that the Desert Fathers and Mothers had of staying in your cell, which is the cell is the place that they prayed and worked. And so it was this real notion of like staying at it, staying at your rhythms of prayer, staying in the place you're with the people you're with. So there was this kind of like call to resilience. But then I was worried that readers would then, if you please do not read the book and stop after chapter 3, because the kind of that first part is this sort of like stay where you are, resilience a little bit. But I was worried about that it would go kind of what you were saying, like just grit it out, which I do not think is. First of all, I don't think that is how we build resilience. I don't think it's effective. And secondly, I certainly don't think it is like the Christian understanding of perseverance or resilience. And I do not think that's what the Desert Fathers were aiming at, and mothers, Desert Fathers and Mothers were aiming at. So I sort of start there, and then I move to say like, okay, so is this Stoicism? Which has become really popular in our culture, the kind of Stoic notion of you just stick with it and you just do it. And so I make a distinction between what I'm talking about and of resilience and perseverance and Stoicism. And there's a lot of ways we can tease out that distinction. I actually do tease it out in quite a lot of ways in the book, but I think I think there's two chief ideas. Number one is hope. I think hope transforms our understanding of resilience and perseverance, because Stoicism is sort of like you just get through it and there's no redemption to be had. Or if there is redemption, it's this kind of partial redemption that comes from your own will, from your own sort of gutting it out.
Maybe from not being thrown around by your own emotions. But
right.
That's maybe the extent of it.
Yeah. But there's no notion of that things will be made new, that things will be repaired, that things, that there is actually like a hope outside of us, and that we can carry hope for ourselves, but also for others, for our communities. So I think hope really changes the idea of patience, and really it turns endurance into expectation. And so I talk a lot about hope and the Christian ideas of hope, especially from the Fathers and Mothers. But I also think this idea of grace is transformative, that our life is not ultimately on our shoulders to get right or figure out or kind of scissor hold together by our own strength, even strength of perseverance, but that we receive it as a gift. so within that, we can receive the arduous good, as you said, but we also receive delight, and we also receive beauty in that, and that we can sort of our life isn't ours to perfect or to save. Like the culture, the country isn't ours to like save, but that there is this sense, I talk in the book about being wholehearted, that you can kind of wholeheartedly give yourself to something, but be lighthearted at the same time. And that I talk more, explain more of what I mean by that in the book, but I do think that the way that we hold that together, wholeheartedness with lightheartedness, is grace, is this gift of that we can really embrace something, but that at the end of the day, it's not on us to make to have a perfect body and a perfect soul and a perfect mind to make our life work, but that we can kind of receive what comes to us as a gift. So those are ways. I do think if you read only the first part of my book, you could come away with a sort of stoic understanding. And I do not want it to feed that. There's a pretty big, in chapter 4, there's a pretty big pivot where I say, like, there is a way that you can read everything I've said to this point of stoicism, and this is how it's different. And that's kind of the rest of the whole book, which is 4 more chapters.
Yeah, that I had not remembered the line from Dorothy Day that you have later in the book on this note. And for those who are, we've talked about Dorothy Day a number of times on No Small Endeavor, but for those who are unfamiliar, one of the greatest, in my mind, one of the greatest of American saints, we might say, in the 20th century, who was deeply involved in the life of the poorest of the poor and those who had on the receiving end of the worst that American life had to offer, and was always in the thick of it, and this remarkable human being. And yet, as you said, she talked about the duty of delight, and that it's crucial that we don't give up on delight and beauty, which I just find so helpful. And then you also talk some about having, that relates to your second notion there on grace, that if we lean into that kind of makes space for showing grace to ourselves, right? Of learning to relax, and even seeing maybe relaxing as a sort of spiritual exercise. But I don't know, any further comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the idea of limits, is that there is this sort of blessedness in going, we are limited. We can't do it all. And we need rest. But also, even in ways like we will fail at things. And that there can be this kind of joyful embrace of our limits. If our life is not all on our shoulders, there can be a stillness that comes from it not being entirely in our hands to perfect the world or to perfect ourselves. That doesn't keep us in, I do not think that keeps us in a place of apathy or inaction. I actually think if it is all on our shoulders, that creates a lot of paralysis and fear and anxiety. And as we are able to sort of accept our limitations, accept the limitations of ourselves as individuals, of our government, of our culture, that there is a freedom that comes from a freedom that frees us up to do then what we can, to do the work we can do. And to do that knowing that it is partial and it is limited, and that that's okay, you know.
What's this looked like for you in just very practical terms in daily rhythms of life, or how has it informed your work in the world or your being in the world?
I mean, one of the ways is really practically is that I have for a long time kept Sabbath. And that is this sort of temporal way of saying, like, that's all I'm going to do this week. And that's going to have to be enough. And particularly when I worked for the New York Times, that my piece would come out on Sunday, and I would try not to look at it. I mean, everything was in. There was nothing else to do. It was done. And so to not try to respond or see how people are thinking, just to sort of let it go, and then to try to truly release it, and which was hard to do. But even now, to say, I'm going to kind of fight for rest in my life, and that looks like, for me, a digital rest of getting really away from all screens and saying, I can miss things, I can miss news, I can miss things, and it's fine. That is a very small way. But another way I see this in my own life all the time is parenting. If there's anything this desert experience that I have had and walking through kind of burnout has taught me, it's how much I want to control everything and how little control I have. And that there's a lot of joy to be had in knowing that, I don't really control the outcomes of my life. I don't control, I can't control my children. I can't control, our politics. I can't control, there's much I can't control. And so with that, to sort of give up trying, I think, in a really healthy way, or give up trying to control, and instead respond to the moment you're in, to continue in this craft of trying to learn to love, knowing that we are absolutely not in control of the outcome.
What's any other final thoughts on fortitude, staying with it? Surely we've got some folks listening who say, yes, I feel burned out. Or the one synonym you use at some point in the book, the fed upness. And so people listening who might be fed up, any kind of closing admonition or encouragement about how one might go about navigating such a season?
Yeah. I mostly want to encourage people that the goal is not to not feel that. The goal is not to get through it and be full of bliss as quickly as possible. I think the goal is to find the invitation to you where you're at in the middle of the desert. So what is the ways that you're being called to deepen? Where's God in the middle of where you are just today? And I do think when we are in places of unfulfillment and fed upness, it's easy to think, if only I was, whatever it is, younger, thinner, around better people, had kinder neighbors, different children, or a different president, or a different, had more money, lived in a different place or time, then it would be better. And I am not saying that none of those things would improve things. They would. But I am kind of saying, just like the Desert Fathers and Mothers discovered, that that all of that is honestly a distraction from what we're called to right where we are, right in this moment and today. And the good things, the craft of faith and the craft of life and love that is in this moment that we're called to. So I want to encourage them, they're not doing life wrong. That the way they're feeling is really normal, and maybe even as part of becoming whole, and part of becoming who they're meant to be, but that they have to lean in to the incompleteness and the disorientation of our lives, and know that it's not by escaping all of that that we find peace, but it's in the middle of all of that we're made who we're meant to be. We learn to be resilient. We learn to be, like my book says, companions to the wind.
And been talking to Tish Harrison Warren on her new book, What Grows in Weary Lands. Tish, great to be with you again. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.